So for those of you who are new to the channel, last week I put up a video where I talked about preparing for Section 2 of the GAMSAT and the structure that I used to score in the top 1% of everyone who was sitting the GAMSAT in that year. So what I wanted to do today was to take you through a real life practice session on how I would use that structure to get ready for the exam. And when I was preparing for the exam, what I would do is give myself 5 to 10 minutes to work through that structure and generate a scaffold that I would use to then write an essay. Because in the exam you have 5 minutes of reading time and you have an hour to complete 2 essays. So if you break up that time, you've got 5 minutes per essay to plan and 25 minutes per essay to actually do the writing component of it. So what I would do is bring up a practice GAMSAT quote generator, which you can find many online, and then I would generate quotes randomly and then work through the structure. So that's what I'm going to do today. So first of all, I'm going to put my timer on starting at 0, and that's starting now. And I'm going to then generate a random quote. So I'm going to click generate, and the theme is politics. Always a good theme for an argumentative essay. So the first quote is, "You show me a capitalist and I'll show you a bloodsucker," Malcolm X. The second quote is, "The first duty of a man is to think for himself," Jose Marti. 3, "Every society has the criminals it deserves," Emma Goldman, interesting. 4, "In many years I've come to a conclusion that 1 useless man is a shame, 2 is a law firm, and 3 or more is a Congress," so that's looking at democracy. 5, "My concern is not whether God is on our side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right." It's a little bit religious for the theme of politics, I think. The first one is interesting, by Malcolm X. "You show me a capitalist and I'll show you a bloodsucker." That's a really interesting quote. It's talking about capitalism versus socialism to a certain degree. It's saying that someone who is capitalist is invariably someone who is looking to try and draw value of their external environment at the expense of other people and in order to aggrandize themselves. That's an interesting position. So I think that's the quote that I'm going to look at, because I think there's a lot that we could dig into there to try and generate arguments. And you'll notice that I'm not trying to pick quotes that I like necessarily or that I agree with. I'm just choosing quotes that have a lot of heft to them, that there's some depth there that I can start moving into. And the position I have to decide upon as we go into 1 minute and 22 seconds is, do I agree with this quote or don't I agree with it? And it's not about whether I personally agree with it or don't, it's about what I think we can write an interesting essay on. And sometimes that's going to be the position that you don't agree with, the more controversial position to you. So I'm going to say that in this case, we are going to agree with this. We're going to say that capitalism can bring out some bad things in people, just because it's an interesting position to take for the purposes of this. All right, so what's our first argument? Why do we believe that? Why do we think that capitalism is someone who is going to be out for themselves at the expense of society? Because it's a controversial point. And we're going to say that the capitalist ideal naturally comes at someone's expense. So we're going to say that in a perfectly capitalist society, there has to be many losers in order for there to be one winner. And so, as an example of that, we're going to look at healthcare. So specifically, we're going to look at low taxation and poor public service in healthcare creates opportunities for wealthy individuals, i.e. aggrandizes wealthy individuals, but it comes at the expense of society. So essentially the example that we're using there is going to be like a privatized healthcare system, maybe the American healthcare system. We're going to say that even though that if you're living the capitalist ideal, that you can create a lot of opportunity by having low taxation for individuals that have means, but the downside to that is that by not having a good public service, those who don't have means or aren't wealthy are going to suffer because they could be bankrupt by healthcare costs, or because when they access healthcare, they may not be able to access as good healthcare or coverage because they may not have as much money or wealth. So that's the example that we're going to use. And we're going to say that the counter argument might be that low government. Actually, no, what we're going to say is the counter argument might be that government-led services are never as good as private-led services. So what we're saying is the original position is incorrect, or our argument is incorrect, because even though public healthcare may not be around, private healthcare is around and it's invariably better. So an example might be the technological advancements of private healthcare in comparison to public healthcare. So i.e. in a private system, we've been able to make a far greater number of advances than we've been able to make in a public system. So in comparison. All right, so that's going to be the example that the counter-argument is going to use. And then at the end of that paragraph, we now want to link back to our original point. We're going to try and say the counter-argument is wrong. And so what we're going to say is that counter-argument doesn't take into account that well-serviced public systems are just as good as private systems. And so we're going to use the Australian healthcare system as an example of a world-class system that is primarily public-led, and yet despite that has created outputs of excellent healthcare outcomes. So that's going to be our counter proposal to that, and that's going to link back to our argument that in fact the capitalist ideal naturally comes at someone else's expense, and that that's ultimately a bad thing, i.e. that to be a capitalist you have to be willing to bloodsuck, in inverted commas, from other people or from the broader society. So you can see there that we're now at 5 minutes 30. I've just stopped the clock because what we've done is we've essentially generated half of an essay at this point in time. So what we've created here is a paragraph. We've got our initial sort of quote. What we've said is, do we agree with the quote or don't agree with the quote? In this case, we're going to agree with the quote. And then we've generated an argument, which is that the capitalist ideal naturally comes at other people's expense. The example we're using is healthcare. The counter-argument to that is that in fact a public healthcare service is never as good as a private healthcare service, and therefore capitalism actually creates a better outcome. It doesn't bloodsuck, but rather it helps people. And then the example that they're going to use for that is the technological advancement of a private healthcare system. Maybe America might be an example, maybe there's another one that you can think of. And as a counter to that, i.e. to reinforce our original position, we're going to say that a well-resourced public system is just as good as a private system, and more than that, it covers everyone and not just some people. So you can see here that what we've done is we've created depth. We've put forward our position, we've then challenged our position, and then we've finished off by reinforcing our position. And for someone who's marking an essay, this shows the criteria of complex thinking, it shows well-constructed thoughts, and if you write it in a sensible way, it's going to show that you can construct a really reasonable paragraph that links back to the stimulus. So what we're going to do for the next 5 minutes then would be to do the same process, but for the second paragraph. And you can see in that way, we would have taken 10 minutes, we've created 2 paragraphs, and we essentially have a working essay there on the page. So guys, I hope that that was really helpful to you. I hope that you can see now how you could take the structure that I was advocating for and in real time, within 5 minutes, generate essentially the equivalent of a paragraph of an essay, so that if you took 10 minutes, you would then be able to generate an entire essay. And as you can see from this, if you take that structure, it's not all that much to convert that into an essay. You don't have to do much with that to put that on the page and have that be something you could submit. So taking that 5 to 10 minutes worth of planning time at the beginning of the process during section 2 can actually be a massive advantage to you in terms of how well you're going to score, because the way that you construct your response is going to be so much better. Okay guys, thank you for watching. I hope you found this helpful. If you've enjoyed the video, then please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting like. And until next time, enjoy the work.